One of the things I wanted to do with this channel was to bring something creative to Doctor Who, as well as just talking about episodes. Now, I'm a photographer and I used to be a writer, and I've done some filmmaking and animation and graphic design as well, so there's a fair few things that might be fun to mix with a Doctor Who theme. And no sooner did I start this channel than it was the 60th anniversary. So I really wanted to do something creative that showed my love for the show, and I wanted you to join me on this journey to see if I manage it. Beyond the Sofa. I knew I wanted to do something for the 60th pretty much straight away, and it seemed like photography was the best route to start getting something together. For Halloween, I'd put together an image of me as a Cyberman, and then I'd modified that, adding in the Tomb of the Cyberman into it as well. But that didn't seem quite enough for a 60th year, and I wondered if I could mix my love for photography with some 3D models to make a final image. The only problem was I'd never done 3D before.
I've no real idea how to do 3D work, but what I found was this website, TurboSquid, where I could download some TARDIS models and have a play. To save money, I didn't go and buy a super expensive bit of 3D modelling software, because there is an incredible tool that you can use for free, which has already been used in a few films, such as Captain America the Winter Soldier and Spider-Man 2. It's called Blender. I needed another tool as well called F-Spy, which helps me to place the TARDIS in the right place and at the right size. I rendered the image from that and brought that into Photoshop, using a photo that I'd recently taken on a trip to the Lake District as a backdrop. So this process was fairly simple. Basically, you change the look and feel of the photo to how you want. Here I've removed some shadows, changed the brightness and contrast, changed some colours, and added a level of mist to the background. And at this point, I was able to composite the TARDIS in place and match its colours to the scene. From there on, I added some special effects as I wanted it to look like the TARDIS was materialising, and this is what made the final image. It was a good test run.
Okay, so it kind of worked. I'm happy with the way that the initial picture turned out. Maybe I've got some of the colours wrong here, but I like the basic composition, and adding the TARDIS in wasn't too much of a task. The main issue I will run into, however, is going to be lighting and my ignorance of creating 3D scenes. But for the 60th, I really need to do something a little bit more special. I really need a road trip. This is the first step on my journey to create the photograph that I want. Behind me is a church, and I've come to the pretty little village of Aultborne, which in past decades has been known by another name. You might have heard of it yourself. It's called Devil's End.
Be with you right away. Over and out. A fat lot of good that'll do.
So I found what I think is the perfect shot, and you can see it on screen right now. And what I'm able to do here is to have the church right in the middle of the screen, and I've also got the green in there and the monument in there as well, and those of course featured in the show, but it also gives me enough space to be able to put other stuff, other digital assets in a bit later on, which is kind of what I'm trying to do. So the next thing for me is to take this shot. I'm going to do a thing that's called bracketing, where I'm actually taking 3 versions of the same shot at various different exposures, and that means that even though we've got really lovely light right now, it's just about perfect, but even though that's the case, it does mean I'm going to be able later on, if there's some dark bits that didn't work, I can use the darker shot and then just bring those out, or if there's some light bits that bits that aren't quite bright enough, bring that out using the other shot. So I'm going to do that now, and that's it. That's all I came all this way to take one photograph.
Aultborne is a lovely little village, and I couldn't let this opportunity pass by to have a little look around. It's amazing that it still looks like it did in the 1970s, and because of the way the village is laid out, there's only a few places where the idyllic square is spoiled by some modern cars parked in the street.
I'd be no good in the actual TARDIS because I've just had to squeeze my way through the doors of that pub. This backpack is a little bit unwielding, but this pub itself is it was featured in The Demons. It used to be the Cloven Hoof. In fact, it was always the Blue Boar, but they changed the name and they made some signs. If you ever visit Aultborne, this is a really great stop. Not only did they do food and drink here, and I had a lovely drink here, only a soft drink, folks, don't drink and drive, but they've also got a little snug in the back where you can see a few pictures taken when people were here in 1971. So kind of exciting if you're a Doctor Who fan. If not, maybe go somewhere else. I don't know. Depends what you're interested in. The other thing that they've got here as well is a heritage centre, and apparently there's photos in the heritage centre of the filming and things like that there. So I'm going to have a wander along there now and have a quick look at it, because whilst I'm here and taking photos and things, it might be a good idea to find out a little bit about the place as well. I've had quite a good day here, and I'm hoping that that one shot is going to be the shot that I get to use on the final production. We'll see anyway. There aren't many times when you go out of your way to take a picture of a bin, but this bin is a little bit different. It's been created by the West Street Motor Company here in Aultborne, and of course it's a TARDIS. I've never wanted to get close to a smell so much in my life. Anyway, I thought I'd take a picture of it just so that I've got a sort of record shot of, hey, I've been here, I've seen the TARDIS that you throw rubbish into. Apparently, it's smellier on the inside. So that image is going to be the backplate for my scene, but what I really need to do is photograph a TARDIS. Well, I've got one of these in-flight TARDISes that seems like a pretty good model to use because it's quite big. Now, I can't just take a picture of this. I need to make sure that the lighting is right and that the positioning is right as well. And that means setting up some sort of proper studio lighting. But I can't do any of that until I know where the TARDIS is going to appear in the image and what lights are going to be affecting it. So I'm going to jump into Photoshop for the initial edit. To make everything stand out, the first thing that I need to do is create a nighttime shot from this daytime one. This process called day for night. So to start off with, I'm going to mask out some of the layers of the church, the monument, and the middle ground in between. And this is going to allow me to add in elements behind them at a later date. But it's much easier to do it at this stage before I've played around with any of the colours. This takes ages, and it's quite a dull process as well, but it's worth it, as you'll see later. Next, I do the actual day for night conversion, which means adding a hue and saturation curve and a photo filter adjustment. The trick here is to reduce the colour, which is what happens at dusk, but still allow some of the original colours to seep through. Now, the concept I have for this is Return to Devil's End, and we're going to see several incarnations of the Doctor joined by a few companions and some of the monsters that they face during the show. Basically, I want one element from each era. Because I was in Aultborne, I'm starting with the Third Doctor, who will be represented by the Church. And of course, the big story of the Church is that some people actually thought that the BBC blew it up. So I'm going to blow it up. Basically, we do this by taking lots of fire elements and placing them around the church. And we'll start with this volcano, which we want to sit behind the church. And you can see here how that selection of the church that I made earlier makes that a lot easier to do. Once that's in place, we need to light up any parts of the buildings that are going to be affected by the explosion. Again, a major benefit of having those selections already made means that it's going to be easier doing this. All I'm doing here is getting a yellow colour fill and then painting the edges where the light would actually spill over onto the buildings. I'm not actually very good at this bit. I'm a photographer, and this is mostly new to me. So this is where the whole thing could go drastically and horribly wrong. Once that's done, I wanted to work on the sky. I've got a really nice vortex image that I thought I'd like to use for the main star field for the background, and I've also got a proper star field for the background as well. And next, I want to work on what's called atmospheric perspective. Now, that's where objects in the background will have a little less contrast and detail. So I'm going to do that by adding some fog effects to the different layers of the image. We'll now move on to compositing other fire elements, and I have this lovely plume of smoke to add in, and I'll add in some more fire to the top of the church roof as well. And this is where I want to bring in the second, third Doctor element. See, I thought that the smoke I'm adding in here looked a little bit like a head. And what better thing to put on that head than the master himself, Roger Delgado? These are rather simple to add just by masking the image and changing the blend mode and then recolouring where needed with hue and saturation.
Once the master was in, I wanted to finish off the sky elements by adding the crack from Matt Smith's era. Again, fairly simple to do, and I've managed to add a glow to it as well, which makes it a little bit more ethereal. I also added in another explosion at the bottom of the church because this thing is going to be demolished. And I wanted it to look a little bit like the building had cracked. So I found a picture of a concrete crack, and then I've superimposed that onto the building. I'm actually very pleased with the way that that turned out. And of course, I wanted the flames coming out of the top of the tower. In fact, I want this tower covered in flames, really. So I add in the first flame effect here on the window, and I actually think that turned out really well. But before I can do the next bit, I've got to remove this really large shadow that's falling across the tower. And to do that, I'm going to cut out the face of the building that we can see and use transform tools to maneuver it into place. Then a mask hides the bits that we don't need and reveals the bits that we do. I can then light this up so that it looks like it's reflecting the light from the explosion that we'd already put in. And now we're going to use the same process to create that fire that we did in the other window. Now, this explosion wouldn't look great without lighting the clock up and adding even more flame effects. So that's exactly what I went on to do. To light the clock, I used a solid color, blend modes, and a blend if function to make it all work together. And after a little rejig of the lighting on the houses, I turned my attention to the windows. I wanted it to look like the whole building was on fire, so I used a fire element and then blended that into the windows, again using the blend if function to make the job a lot easier. And with that, the church explosion was done, bar a few tweaks that I'll make later on. The next thing was to get my first character in place, my hero doctor. That was going to be Tom Baker. I'd found a decent picture of him, but it wasn't quite right. I wanted his face to have a different expression, and I needed to remove the hat from his hand. So I went about cutting out the head from the original model and replacing it with this one from a different picture. This actually worked out really well. The one problem was the hat, and this is the only time that I actually used artificial intelligence in the image using Photoshop's generative fill to create the hand for me. Nevertheless, it still had to be edited in place. With Tom done, I put him in the picture, matched his colours, and added a shadow for him as well. And initially, he was far too tall, and I had to go back to old production shots from the Damons to try and figure out how tall he would have been compared to the monument. With Tom finally in place and at the right size, I started adding in the other elements, the first one being the great vampire from State of Decay. So I brought in some rocks, and actually those are the real rocks from the TV show, but the hand on the TV show just wasn't good enough quality to add into this image, so I had to find and add another hand. I then matched the colour to the scene and painted in the light that would be falling on it. I then painted in the light from Tom as well, and now I just had to add in all of the other elements to the scene. And they were all processed in exactly the same way. For the time being, I decided to use a stunt TARDIS, but I ended up liking the look of it and the position and everything so much that I ended up keeping it there. So in the end, I didn't need to do a photo shoot of my miniature this time, but perhaps I might keep that for another video. I also added in a seal of Rassilon in the sky because I wanted the crack to look a little like the hands of a clock, and that helped to set the whole thing off. And at this point, I had a process for adding each of the elements, so I just went through this process for all of the characters as they were being added. I think I started to get a little bit more used to the process at this point as well, which was a help. The final thing was to fix the TARDIS. The position looked great. The image itself looks fantastic, but I wanted it to have some of that regeneration energy in its windows and seeping out of the door. Most of this was done with solid colours, using a glow effect on them to get the right look. But I also added some smoke elements coming out of the doors and tinted that yellow to give it the effect of the regeneration energy, and some nanobots escaping the TARDIS, you know, like the Doctor uses in the Doctor Dances. And I used some embers to get that look at the edge of the regeneration energy, and again, just coloured those yellow. I just needed to relight Sarah Jane and Colin at this point, and a few finishing touches, and I was done.
In the final piece, you can find an element from each era of the show. We have the Daleks from the first Doctor, the Yeti from the second, the town itself and the Master from the third. We have Tom, K9 and the Great Vampire from the fourth. The Cyberman is from the fifth, and this was actually the Cyberman from the Five Doctors, and I used it near the church as a reference to the way that Pat Troughton dies in The Omen. Colin was the sixth Doctor, who's there in the picture. The Hemivores from Curse of Fenric and the seventh Doctor. Paul is there as the eighth Doctor. There's a Bad Wolf scrawled on the roof from the ninth Doctor. Sarah Jane and the Weeping Angel from the 10th. The Crack from the 11th Doctor's era. Missy from the 12th. Jodie's there as the 13th with her Sonic. We've got Beep the Meep making an appearance for the 14th. And Ruby Rose from the 15th, even though we haven't seen them yet. And there we have it, the final piece. I hope you like it. I hope you found this interesting, and I'd love to know what you think in the comments below. Until next time, thanks ever so much for watching, and why not join me next time we go Beyond the Sofa.